Okay, let's start. Welcome everybody to this first panel, this first idea of new panel in the virtual world. So thanks all of you for attending. It's nice having so many people here. As you know, this first panel today is on publishing culture in the BPM community, papers, and papers. You have another interesting panel on Thursday, but this is the one we have to talk about today. First we have to do is thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to Jan, Flavia, Agnes, and Antonio. You did an excellent work. You made an excellent videos. It was a kind of crazy idea, the one that we had to do all of this. And so today we are trying to make a wrap up of what has been discussed. Thank also for your participations in the social media. That we have had plenty of answers to the WOBA poll. So thank you very much to all of you. Thanks to the speakers. So Matthias, it's your turn just to summarize a little bit what has been doing in these 24 hours.
Yeah, very warm welcome also from my side and also from me. I would like to extend, well, this thank you to the four panelists, Jan, Flavia, Agnes, and Antonio. And I just very briefly want to reflect a bit on some of the aspects that were raised in the statements. So Ernest and I took the liberty out of those many aspects that were mentioned in the statements to single out very few, and of course it's a very subjective selection. But we thought some of those we thought are interesting, in particular to the community, and then also pushed this into the polls in the WOBA app. And here there was this idea or this general aspect of, well, the recognition of years on childcare that of course relates to the role of publications for academic careers when advancing in an academic career. And so things like, for instance, a quota per professor for female professors is something that at least got some support by people who found the button to vote here. Then another aspect this popped up in several of the statements was the conference review model. And here in particular, Jan put forward this idea of, well, yeah, sometimes we have very detailed, we have very good reviews, but then the question is what is really incorporated from those reviews? And then maybe even if you ask for a revision, who looks at those revisions and what has been incorporated from the review? So the question is a bit whether conferences should go for a more elaborated revision process, of course, leaving open how that may look like. And that is also something that at least a majority of those who voted here supported. Picking up on two more aspects, we had this idea or this aspect brought forward by Antonio on the productivity being prevailing over quality, and that could be a long-term risk. And if one agrees, first there was agreement and disagreement for both of those questions that are listed here. And if we agree, right, what can we do about it? Well, there were some ideas that are mentioned here, arguing that maybe some normalized scores are needed. But this is always a trade-off also between getting feedback and then also not, let's say, publish everything. On the other hand, Flavia put forward this point of being very much ranking driven and what is the kind of trust that we can put into those rankings. And again, right, here there was agreement, disagreement, whether one could trust rankings, and a few notes on what could be done. Pointing to the quality measurements that are obviously very important, but then also, last point here, pointing out that this whole thing is maybe something that per se is not entirely objective, but is a rather political process. So there were just a few things that popped up here, and now the idea would be that I hand over to our four panelists who already gave their views, their statements in those videos, and would like to also invite them to quickly maybe strengthen one of their points, or also react to the other statements, and extend a bit on their thoughts. And I suggest that we start with Agnes. Agnes, would you like to go ahead?
I have to unmute. Okay. Thanks, Matthias. So when I was asked to comment on the statement papers, then immediately 2 points came into my mind. So the first one is we definitely have to appreciate more workshops. because my observation is that the people mainly submit for conferences or journal articles, go for journal articles. So maybe we might consider something like a publication scheme where we define some criteria, what makes a good workshop paper, a conference paper, or a journal paper. And the other issue is the quantity of papers and research careers. So my observation from the last years, and I'm already plenty of years in research and academia, is that childcare isn't considered enough when applying for a professorship. So I would vote to have something like a female quota for professors. That's it.
All right, thank you. So I forgot to mention that after this first round, we'll also, of course, are happy to see whether there are some questions or remarks by the audience. But we first would like to, well, give the panelists the option to provide a summary of their viewpoint. So, Antonio, do you want to continue?
Mute. Thank you, Matthias. For me, speaking about publishing culture in general, between productivity and quality, and how to change the current balance, has a major problem, which is the change in itself. Any change in general is extremely difficult because at the end of the day, it implies to change our mindset. It's a cultural thing. And it's, in my opinion, it's much more difficult than write a very highly impact paper. On top of that, we also need to influence in evaluation system, which is something that is out of our control. So in that sense, the topic that we are dealing with, which is publishing culture, is complex and very difficult to change. As a minor problem, maybe to agree what do we understand on be productive, to have good quality. This is, in my opinion, a minor problem. And as a specific proposal that I'd like to pose today is after listening to Jean, a thought crossed my mind, which was the rolling deadlines. That for those that don't know about rolling deadline, is just that you have the possibility between 2 consecutive editions of a conference to have the possibility of submitting 3 or 4 times. For example, BLDB. Perhaps it's a way that people that don't usually publish in the main conference in BPM may more possibilities, more chances to publish. Perhaps maybe something that we could talk about it. That's all.
Right. Thank you, Antonio. Flavia, do you want to continue? And I may already mention that whoever from the audience has already questions may put this into the Q&A functionality here in Zoom or the respective client, or raise a hand and then we'll get back to that. Flavia.
Thank you, Matthias. I will comment on 2 points of my statements. First, this one about the ranking, taking the chance that people have put some comments on this. And so I think we are really ranking driven, but I'm not saying that we don't trust these rankings, and we cannot abandon these rankings. They are really important, but I think we should find another ways to measure the impact of our work. Because in the end, what matters is about a publication is the research that we are reporting on it. And the research should at least have some impact on people, on the way people live. So it should have a social impact. So how can we measure this? Maybe we should make an effort to make the results of our researches more understandable for the public. And then we can try to elect some other stakeholders to try to help us to give the sense, to make sense of what we are doing here. And the other point is about the workshops. So Agnes started to talk about workshops, but I think workshops are not about the publication, or should not be about the publication. We shouldn't care about this. Workshops are really for working together. So we should, it would be a nice opportunity to gather the researchers and to share ideas and really building something together. Many years ago, I was in the Pattern Languages conference. I don't know if you heard about this, but it was one of my best experiences in workshops. We sit together with people, we read the papers of everyone before, and we really worked together on the papers. The publication was only made after that because we improved our ideas, our papers, we were all talking about the same issues. So I think the workshops might work like this. That's it. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you. Jan.
Yeah, I want to make 2 comments, I guess, in response to what I said in the video. The first was basically exploring the idea, if we only had one type of publication that counts, let's say that's journals for now, then I think it gives us a lot of rooms to experiment more with the other formats. So I talked a little bit about conferences, meeting places. I like Flavia's idea of really doing something else with workshops. As long as they keep counting as publications, then we'll get papers. And we need to review them, and they need to count somewhere. We need to build ranking lists to evaluate them and all sorts. But if they wouldn't be publications, then we can do a lot more with our conferences, with our workshops. And I think that is an interesting idea. The second point I wanted to make is we talk here about a publishing culture. Now, culture are values that manifest in what we do, in our behaviors. So if you want to change the culture, we need to change what we do and how we do it. Of course, that takes time, but it's entirely feasible. So if we move away from, I don't know, counting or ranking papers in different venues, from having our students publish 27 papers before they're allowed to do their dissertation, then over time, the publishing culture will change. But it, of course, takes the community to change their behaviors, first of all, before the culture changes. You can't do it the other way around. Thank you.
Hi, Matthias. We have some questions. I don't know. Thank you very much, all of you. Agnes, have you seen the Q&A? The first one is related to you.
Yeah, I already responded to them.
Okay. In the chat?
Yes.
Okay, because you have the Q&A. Can you develop a little bit further on that, please, Agnes?
Okay, so some people raised the idea that instead of my idea of female professor quota, there is an idea of relative to opportunity, which is, let's say, counted for in application. But from my point of view, this is really only theory. So I was member of a lot of committees already, and what really counts are papers, and the project that you have, project proposal that you successfully has advertised. And from my point of view, it really will not change the situation. But this is my view.
Mm-hmm. I would hand over to Baudouin, who also, wrote a question in the chat, but also I think probably can a bit explain the idea behind the motivation for a potential submission fee. Baudouin, can we have you?
Well, thank you, Matthias, but I would like to respond first to Agnes's comment on female quota, and being from a university who recently lost a discrimination case, right? So TUE about a year ago actually decided that from now on we will only hire women on any academic position, and that turned out to be a decision that was actually in violation of the European or the universal rights of like anti-discrimination. But this did spark an enormous discussion countrywide and even internationally, and I've spoken to quite a few people on this whole idea of only hiring women versus having some sort of, well, positive discrimination committees that are diversity aware, etc. One of the things that kept popping up was that roughly about half the women I talked to suggested that, well, this is a good program. And it's exactly the same thing that you are essentially saying, Agnes. You say, well, this is the only way that we can get diversity into the community, so let's do it. The other half actually said, I would never apply to such a position because she would be constantly faced with the intuition or the sort of the bias of the people around that you're there only because you're a woman, not because you are a good scientist or a great scientist, but simply, well, they had to hire a woman and you applied, so you got hired. I'm not quite sure whether a quota in a community, and the more technical they become, in a community where women are underrepresented is a good idea. Because I think 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years down the line, this stigma might become a much larger problem than the underrepresentation we now have. And it's up to us, right? As a community, it's up to us to make sure that we do not actually start introducing or strengthening this stigma. So I'm all for diversity. I think it's important to have a as diverse as possible group of people doing research together, and that means culture-wise, that means gender-wise, that means, well, in all aspects diverse. But forcing this, I think, is in all respects a bad decision.
Can I comment on this, or do we don't
Please.
have? Matthias, can I comment?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Bodewijn. I fully understand your second point, and I mainly think from a German perspective, where you really have few positions for full professorship, and you have a different system, like for instance in the Netherlands, where you first have assistant, associate, and then full professor. And because in Germany you do not have such a career, so you immediately apply for a full professor, and I think I can count on fingers the female professors in, I say, applied informatics in Germany. And with those women that I spoke, is they had really plenty of, they submitted a lot of applications, and it was quite challenging to, let's say, to even be invited. And if you have, for instance, only a contract which maybe ends in 1 year or half year, then for you you don't mind about this issue, your point that you finally received the position due to that point that you are female.
Yeah, so I agree, and I think I wrote this in the largest national newspaper around the time that this was up. I wrote a large piece where I said exactly this. So rather than giving women like preference in applying, make sure that as a university you give them certainty from day one. Don't hire people into tenure tracks where you run into issues with respect to relative to opportunity discussions. No, just hire somebody that you, based on the CV and the interview, you think it's a good candidate and a good scientist. Give them a permanent position as an assistant professor with the opportunities that go along with it, and in our system allow you to grow all the way to associate or full professor, and stop these stupid tenure tracks that introduce two body problems everywhere.
Yeah, and I have seen situations where you had 4 or 5 open positions for professors, and all positions finally were occupied by men. So this is something where I think I can't believe that there is no female professor that could, maybe she has less papers and less projects, but I'm pretty sure that she can do the similar same job than a man.
So my last vacancy for a tenure track assistant professor had exactly 0 female applicants. And it's not for lack of trying.
I think we should try to move to other questions,
Yes.
Other participants. Martin, you raised your hand. I don't know if you want to comment further on this, or Martin Bauer. No.
Seems to be a 2-step process here with the unmuting.
Yeah.
Doesn't look to be successful. Maybe let's take one of the others first. Coming back to that, also this question of different outlets. So here in the chat, we had this comment on, well, maybe also the difference of the role of conferences more in CS fields, where this is a prime publication outlet, and or the information systems, Wirtschaftsinformatik field, where as Christian Janusz points out, right? This may even be completely removed from some of the very important rankings soon. So what does that change, or how will we cope with that, in particular as a community maybe that sits at the intersection of those fields and is therefore somehow affected by this trend? So maybe, I don't know, Jan or Antonio, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. Well, I have a personal opinion about these ranking lists, and I don't think that's the place here. Let me say this. I think that we need to move away from ranking venues to begin with. What we should be looking at is whether any paper is good. And it's a very different thing. I can say the BPM conference proceedings is a very good venue. That doesn't necessarily mean any one paper in there is good. It could be a brilliant paper at a workshop. It could be a poor paper at a top journal. Right, so this is not a BPM problem. Every scientific community at present has to move away from looking at outlets and venues and moving, I guess, back or forward towards looking at the quality of the research that's being done. And there are ways of measuring this. There's ways of ranking that too, right? I don't know, a very crude measure is citations, but citations favor the old, citations favor white old men as well. We all know that as well. So it has limits as well. But in general, I think we just got to go back and read those papers and see, like, well, that's a good idea or it's not a good idea. Sometimes it's as simple as that. And of course, it means that our hiring committees and everybody else needs to read these papers too, you know? So I really want to move away from people that know exactly how many papers I have published in this and that outlet, but have no idea about what any of these papers are about. And I think that's where we need to get to. And if the BPM community can be the first to do that, that would be a wonderful signal to everybody else out there, whether they be management, IS, computer science, or whatever other field.
So maybe to jump in here, following up on another question that was anonymously posted in the chat, right? There's this perception that, well, in particular also junior researchers, maybe PhD students, are encouraged to submit a lot, simply because, well, in the end, there is some, we all know this, there is, of course, there is a certain element of randomness in the review process, in the acceptance process. And then in the end, if you write papers that are, let's say, on the edge, just writing more of those papers increases your chances maybe to get one in, right? So this is a trend that would be exactly against what Jan just argued for. So how can we stop this? Or how can we change this? As we also heard, change is difficult, but we heard that it will, in the end, is up to us.
Who answers? Antonio? No opinion on that?
Maybe I can mention or comment on it. So the question is, do we really have time to look into these papers? Because I was a member already of plenty of committees, and so yes, you take a ranking, and then it's very easy to rank the candidates. So here, this is the number of papers, A, B, C, D, and then project, and so on. But now looking into really the publications takes a lot of time. Even if I really like this idea, the question is, do we really have the time to do this? Because usually the ranking in the back office of, let's say, of application procedures is done by PhD students or somebody else, because the chair maybe she doesn't have enough time to do this. And the question is, do the people really members have enough time to read through the papers? And also, are they the experts in this domain? If not, then we have to ask, let's say, further colleagues to comment on these papers. But do they have time? I doubt. Even I really like the idea.
Moving to another question by Martin van der Werf. I would like to know Flavia's opinion. Jean Martin, he's asking, Why do we want to go to conference, Flavia? What's your opinion on that?
Flavia, you are still muted.
You should unmute, Flavia.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, why do we want to go to conferences? I think conferences is the place to meet our colleagues, our probable partners on research, because the most important for me in conferences is this social environment where we can meet people and discuss our ideas, and so that's it. So I think it doesn't matter a lot if the conference is well ranked or not. It's all about the community, to meet people, to know the person behind the paper, as I say. So that's what I think about going to conferences. But of course, if we have an opportunity to have a paper published, we will be listened. People will know about us. So, but the evaluation process in reviewing processes is very hard in some conferences. It's the same in BPM. It's very hard. So we don't have many papers being presented. And sometimes, as I said in my video, it looks like the musical chair game. We have always the same people publishing in the same conferences. It's not about BPM, it's about all the conferences that I know, at least in our area, at least in computer science. And so it's very nice to be here. It's very nice to listen to those people talking. But I think we should have, maybe we should think about how can we accept new members in the club. So that's it.
I don't know, Matthias, maybe you should be wrapping up just to close more on time. There is one question nobody answered, and I would like to finish with this question. And just with maybe a Boolean answer, yes or no, from the four panelists, the inverse order than before. Should we pay for submitting a paper to a conference, as Bodewine asked some time ago? Jan, should we pay for that? So a submission fee that then if the paper got accepted. Boolean answer, plus if you want a short explanation why of your answer.
I guess I vote no. I don't think that at the moment we should be paying more to do our work. So you know, we could talk about ratios of doing reviews also when you submit papers and stuff like this, but paying for submission, no. If you ask me right now, I would say no.
Okay, Flavia. But you're muted again, Flavia.
Sorry, can you repeat, please, the question?
The question is, Bodewine was suggesting for a submission fee, so that if you want to submit papers, you pay this fee, and if the paper gets accepted, then you don't pay for the registration to the conference. If it gets rejected, you have paid the submission fee.
Yeah, it's a little bit tempting to accept this idea, but I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea. I think we would be trying to reward not a good behavior, I think.
Antonio, did you solve the problem with the mic? Can you answer the question?
He's still not there.
He's not there, so Agnes, it's your turn.
Yes, I also would vote again this idea. I would suggest to reward reviewers, because we spend a lot of time reviewing papers, and I would vote to do this rather than paying for paper submission.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthias. If you want to close
just
this.
complementing, I think there was an idea of an anonymous attendee that the tenure committees and PhD supervisors should have an obligation to discourage people from submitting too many papers. I think that would be the idea. We should chase for this special paper, the idea, the complete idea, and not submitting too many papers. Of course, I think that the feedback is always important, at least mainly for PhD students. So we encourage them to submit, to keep submitting. But I think we should change this culture. This is not so good, in my opinion.
So thank you, Matthias. Thanks to closing up.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, we touched upon quite a number of points with actually very specific suggestions, even though the submission fee, at least among our panelists, was voted down a bit. Thank you again for your participation, to all the attendees, and in particular to our panelists who prepared those video statements, and maybe also to the attendees. If you have not checked them out, do so. Maybe as a summary, there are a lot more ideas and aspects touched upon in those video statements that we could cover here. So thank you again, and this closes it. And Adela, do you want to? Oh no.
No, Adela is not here, so I have
Okay.
to end up the session.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Adios.